Good evening. Let me try to modulate. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, welcome. My name is John Schmid, Chairman of the Board of the Green Parking Council, and I welcome and thank you all for being here tonight. The Green Parking Council is a nonprofit group made up of about 50 organizations that have signed a pledge of sustainability to be action agents of change for the good of the planet. And our playground is the parking lot and the parking garage in the urban landscape. Together, our group controls over 20,000 parking garages in the United States with over 5 million parking spaces. It's a pretty good number. Tonight, initially, our goal was simply to certify garages green, and the level of sustainability of a high-performance building, we wanted to establish benchmarks and have that because that's not something that happens right now. And we've done that, we've achieved that goal. We are now recognized universally as the certification standards for certified green garages. And I'm looking out at the crowd, and there's a lot of people here that I'd like to thank for that because it's an incredible goal. But tonight we're elevating the conversation to talk about the parking lot of tomorrow and the parking garage of the future. We have an amazing group of visionaries here tonight in the room to talk about this, to talk about the future of sustainability, weaving the urban tapestry with architecture, urbanism, and parking. It promises to be a lively discussion and welcome. I'd like to thank the BMW Group for hosting the event here in BMW I Ventures Mobility Innovation Incubator Space. And it's fitting that we're here because we are innovative and incubator. I'd like to thank all the board members of the GPC that are here tonight, Mark Gander from AECOM, Mark Martin from Juice Bar, Rachel Yolka from Tim Haas, who's done so much work, thank you. And Mark, I think I mentioned Mark Gander, but you're incredible. Thank you. Joachim Hauser from BMW is Director of Mobility Services for BMW, and we're going to start the conversation with a presentation from Joachim. Joachim, welcome. Joachim flew in from Munich today for this event.
Thank you, John. So, first of all, I have to see where to stand, not to be in the way here. That's it. So my name is Joachim Hauser from BMW, and why are we here? BMW as a car manufacturer for premium cars located in Germany, presenting in New York for green parking. So what's that? How does that come? And I will tell you in a short story about BMW plans for the future, about sustainability, and what this has to do with parking. So we're here today where mobility meets facility. So the next chart, please. So BMW is very much looking into the future of urban markets and urban situations. For our cars are mainly used in urban areas. And we see for the future major changes here in the conditions people have in cities. Today, about nearly 60% of all people worldwide live in megacities, and we will have more people in the future doing that. So this is changing the conditions of driving and mobility. more urbanization. The connectivity will enhance in future in a dramatic way. So our cars are connected today, they will connect in future with all the urban connectivity and business models which are around. So if we switch from one Wi-Fi net today to the next with our smartphones, the cars will do in future by their own. As well, regulation, sustainability, the greenness, and these regulations will come from government. We see that as a global company in all different markets in different shapes, but it's there. We have regulations. Green signs on the cars, if you're allowed to drive in a city or not, and all this stuff. So BMW as a company has to deal with this in future, and also the customers getting more and more require more and more convenience in mobility, and not only in driving. So leaving the car, getting to the next point is nothing which people today really just ask the car manufacturer, but they also ask for different mobility providers to make intermediate changes to make this happen, that people can move seamless from one point to the other, really convenient. These changes, I don't want to go through everything here, really lead to dramatic changes for BMW, for the car manufacturer. In the past, we just opened the plant doors and we produced cars and said, please buy our cars. In future, we will have to really deal with the conditions in the cities, in the different areas. We have to design and we have to influence these conditions to make mobility possible for people, for our customers. So in future, BMW will not only be a car manufacturer, in future, BMW will be a mobility provider. That's strategy number one BMW has given itself 4 years ago. We are heavily working on that target, not to be a pure car manufacturer, but to be the leading mobility provider in the world for premium mobility. This has to do with sustainability. We can't provide mobility without looking to all these conditions. And Paul, if you give me the next chart, this is the answer. We have invented, or in 2007 founded a project named Project I. Project I is not only about cars. Project I is about the future of mobility, how BMW is seeing this. What you see here are two cars, sure cars, but it's really new cars. We will have this in the market 2013, next year. And these cars are megacity vehicles. This car, the bigger one here, is the i3. It's purely designed for megacities. It's a pure electric driven car. It's a carbon fiber body, which a lightweight body. And this car is produced in a very sustainable way. So it's from the very beginning to the end, a car which is different than all the cars we have produced so far. The i8, similar, but with a little bit of sporty touch. But this is not all. The BMW i project also is dealing with mobility services. So how to make services available for mobility. And the office where we are here, the incubator space where we're sitting today, is part of BMW i and part of the mobility services. So what do we see in changes? We have our own research institute. It's not just that we go into the market asking people what's the next car you want to buy. So we are really doing research on behaviors and changes in the market. So we see that the behavior of young people is changing because of conditions. And if you get me the next chart, please, you can see that the car usage of young adults is reduced. So less people are driving, especially in the US. It might have to do with economical conditions, but also there are some changes in behavior. So as a car manufacturer, we have to deal with that. Okay, next. But we also look for requirements. Mobility customers are real customers. They want to have different factors fulfilled. They have requirements convenient, fast, barrier-free, reliable, and economic. That are the 5 areas, the 5 requirements we see a mobility a customer really requires, and that is what our services, mobility solutions for the future are aiming for. So this is why parking is an essential part of that game. We see that parking space and parking garages in megacities have a lot to do with car sharing, have a lot to do with intermodal movements. Well, people will have to use these spaces in the future more often to pick up cars, drop cars, change to other mobility services. And if you go to the next chart, we see that we will need parking garages in the future as a kind of mobility hubs for our business. So we are expecting our most modern cars, the i3 and i8, moving into garages where people can drop this car, share this car, take other mobility services out of the garage, can use pedelecs, electric pedelecs, motorcycles, taxi services, or other services. All that will happen on smartphones, on very much connected cars, so that people really can book their way through the urban areas. If you go one ahead, I also believe that from a business perspective, garages should better look like this. Garage, it's one in Miami we saw in the New York Times, instead of these garages we might have in mind. So we see that in future garages for premium services also should look premium and should have a real premium outlook. And I would love to be in this kind of parking garages instead of some of the garages we know from today. If you go one further, I just want to finish my short presentation on BMW. Here we are a member of the Green Parking Council. BMW is very much committed to be part of this movement, and we want to bring in our ideas in that discussion on how we can make parking more green, but not only more green, but sustainable and part of the urban living. So thank you very much. I believe I have used my time. Thank you. That's from BMW.
Well, I'm just here to say hello quickly to you guys and introduce the panel. My name is Mark Alt, and I was actually the founding executive director of Green Parking Council. So I've been involved with this organization from the beginning and really watch it grow in a really interesting way, from looking at it as a green, like John said, a sort of tactical approach to how can we make parking garages more green. My background's in the sustainability world, and I came on as sort of a cultural ambassador, I guess, in terms of taking an industry that was really a commodity industry and getting them to think about how can we actually be part of a bigger conversation? How can we be part of the solution, not part of the problem? So we had a really interesting time working together, developing the vision and mission of Green Parking Council to be beyond just a green building standard, but understanding what parking, which we normally don't think of as sort of an innovative platform, what can parking do to actually be a platform for some of these ideas that are emerging around urban mobility. And I also run a site called Open Source Cities, and the idea of open source from the beginning has been sort of the North Star for Green Parking Council. It's really the way that I, value and participation by citizens, people who actually live in cities, are actually coming up with, this sort of new idea of citizen-generated urbanism. We're seeing things like Parking Day, where people are taking over the streets for a day and turning parking spaces into ad hoc parks, or things like Ciclavia, where they're shutting down whole city streets and opening them up to biking. There's a lot of really exciting things that are actually happening from the ground up. in terms of rethinking cities and how to make cities more livable for people. So we really want to embrace that sort of bottom-up urbanism and then tie it together with, the really formal urban planning world. So you're going to hear sort of both sides of that a little bit today. And we have some really great panelists. And we are actually very honored to have Susan Cisnazi, the editor of Metropolis Magazine, who I think we'll bring up now, and who will introduce the panelists to you guys. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody for being here. This is a very exciting moment. I have to say I was very skeptical coming in here because it's very difficult for me to understand green garages because they're such monstrosities, but you are on the right track. So as your chairs are being wheeled out, panelists, please have a seat at those comfortable chairs. Come up. And we will be hearing from you. I wanted to say that the panel is really interesting because they bring various expertise. Please come up. Expertise to the discussion. We have the humongous Office of Architecture. There he is. AECOM, the big bear in the room. Not you, but AECOM. And then we have the smaller office, which is really cool. And then we have real estate, urban planning, regional planning. What did I leave out? We're all here. So those are all really great places, and I'm sure you and the audience will add to the discussion your various expertise. In fact, that's what we want to do, because we want to come out of this program with some plans that we can actually start implementing and thinking about. And I think one of the reasons I love the panel that we have here is because everyone is in the position to be a game changer, and we need the game changed. So you all know that. I think the Green Parking Council has started the conversation, and I'm really happy that an automotive manufacturer is actually involved. So what I'd like to ask, first of all, I'm not going to do big introductions, but I'd like to ask Dave Corris from the Regional Plan Association to comment on what was just said, one area from your own expertise as someone who is interested in the multimodal hubs and all of those things that we just heard about. What can you add to Joachim's conversation?
Great, thank you. So I work for an organization called Regional Plan Association that was established in the 1920s to do long-range planning for the metropolitan region. So we have to look out decades, generations ahead, and I can't help but draw parallels between this conversation on parking with the built fabric of the areas that we're sitting in today. I mean, think about the buildings of Soho, the buildings of Tribeca, and the flexibility that they enabled in how humans use space over time. Spaces that were built oftentimes for industrial uses have evolved into residential space, have evolved into commercial space, hubs of innovation like that we're in today. And I think we need to be drawing parallels to that with parking decks as the flexible spaces for mobility for generations to come. So an area that, parking deck that we might have traditionally thought of as just a space to temporarily house cars has to now be conceived as a place, a mobility gathering spot for the community, the hub at which people transition from cars to transit, the hub at which you can access your bike share, et cetera, enabling that flexibility over time. And I think there's a similar strategy for surface parking, just as those structures need to be flexible for the mobility uses within them. Surface lots need to be flexible for the community uses that take up that space. So, surface parking needs to be both designed in a way and particularly located in a way so that throughout the course of the day, throughout the course of a month, throughout the course of a year, the use of that space can transition and can evolve and can oscillate back and forth between storing cars and gathering space, be it be it green markets or outdoor movies at night. And then I think in the greatest transition, surface spaces, surface lots as temporary holding land for future structured parking with intensification of urban development, particularly around our regional transit hubs, around our commuter rail stations, around our bus hubs. So thinking about parking and designing parking in a way that it has that same longevity, same flexibility as much of the built fabric of Manhattan that has created value over such a long time frame.
So I'd like to bring in the real estate expertise here because, I have all of these given prejudices about all of you, so I'm just going to share it. So real estate seems very conservative and very, very much part of keeping things the way they were because apparently while it's profitable, you keep it going. So John Parkinson of the Urban Land Institute, let's address begin to address the real estate issues here, because where are these enlightened developers? How do we begin to understand, begin to see some of this develop? What is your assessment of the possibilities for this sort of change?
Sure, thank you. So I'm John Parkinson. I'm with the Urban Land Institute. As we celebrate our 75th year in business, have focused our mission over the course of that time on the leadership and the responsible use of land and in developing thriving and sustainable communities worldwide. The worldwide component's the most recent addition to that, only recognizing the global fabric of the people who transport from one major urban center to another, from one economic center to another. But within the fabric of, as we were talking tapestry today, right? Within the fabric of the urban core, planning has always had a transformative effect. It keeps coming back in the context here in New York through the Regional Plan Association, but in many other municipal cities, it keeps having that regenerative kind of an impact. And I think that as we look at a company like BMW coming back and saying, how is it that we are going to change what it means to be a mobility company? From being a luxury car company to being a mobility company that's a pretty wild transformation to take on. At the same time that New York is trying to undo the growth that had taken place in the age of the car, right? I mean, let's just focus on since World War II until now, right? All of the sins and that are accompanied with the suburban sprawl, right? I mean, Long Island, we've talked about that a little bit in our preparation for this. Long Island is the poster child for suburban sprawl, right? And so the idea of the whole world isn't Levittown, right? And so we don't want to keep recreating that. So there's a lot more to to the real estate offerings, and I think David hit on a couple of pieces of that, right? This is all about transformation. When it comes right down to it, to look at what is primarily a cash cow, right? A parking lot, a surface parking lot, slightly less so than a multi-leveled one. You have the opportunity to be able to transform that from what is basically the accretive value of cash on a day-over-day basis, to a much longer-term asset that contributes to the urban fabric. It's going to bring in people who are going to be looking to take advantage of the shopping that's been built into the community, and again, the word that's sticking in my mind is about transformation, and I'll come back to that some more, because the developers, whatever other perception there may be, aren't the money grabbing sort, because they're going to build a property and their name is going to be associated with it for a good long time. So you look at a Durst organization as an example, who has the advantage of taking over half of a city block in Midtown Manhattan and building 2.4 million square feet of Class A commercial office space and 0 parking spots. Now, I don't know if that makes them a poster child for Green Parking Council, Mark, but it's really about those folks are all, perhaps driving a car from a different location before they get to one of the 14 subway lines that's going to bring them to their office. But the whole point is that there's a great network around that, and we'll talk some more as this goes on about transit-oriented development. And I think you'll find that those are the kinds of transformative practices that are in place now. And one of the things that you'll hear me try and encourage, and I know David and I have been talking about this some for the last couple of years now, are the policies that, that help encourage that and support that.
So I think I'd like to get Joachim back here, because there was something that was brought up which is really important for us to kind of put into our thinking, is that when an automotive company says that it is becoming a mobility company, it assumes a huge shift in thinking, because it's not just about cars. And I think that's been one of the whole issues of the American automotive manufacturing sector. So can you just tell us the sort of the thing that lifted the tops of your heads off in terms of really smart thinking that you were able to get to this? Because I think we all need to put our brains into this new gear. So Joachim, is there a, yes?
So thanks for that question. It's difficult to answer to say now we know how a transformation like that works. So I believe we have a few brave people within BMW, and they put it through. They took a small team off the usual business that you have time, a half year, 1 year, how long it takes to get to these new ideas. We want to have new concepts. So they really got the space for innovation. The challenge now is really, as you said, the transformation now, how to make that to our main business. And I believe as BMW, how BMW is doing that at the moment, it's not that we say now we know how the end is and what the way will be, but we know one for sure, we are starting the way. We are going that way in parallel to containing and driving our normal business. We are opening a second way, and I believe we are not opening that way just for, let's say, sustainability reasons, but also for profit reasons. We want to make business in that area, as you said, and it's not to lose money. So we want to make business. We are looking for new ways but this time for sustainable business. So I believe it's the trick is really to make space, to have some dedicated people, let's say, like we are sitting here, taking that time and starting the transformation. That's how we started it.
Okay, so brave people with the business in mind and sustainability in their hearts. That's a good combination. So let's talk to Jim Zullo here, who'd like to. I'd like you to add something about the sort of larger scale question that we're addressing here.
Well, first of all, our firm, I'm with Timothy Hodson Associates. We're an architect engineering firm that specializes in parking structures. So I take great offense to your opening comments about monstrosities. But it's actually, that's part of the transformation. I mean, I also work, I'm a bridge and tunnel guy, so I'm in the suburbs a lot. And that's where I think you're really seeing a big transformation related to sustainability and the way people live. There's a lot of demographic data about pulling people back into urban areas where, the baby boomers are giving up their 3-acre lots. They're going into smaller units in towns. Hoboken, right across the river, is an example. The millennium generation doesn't want to move out to suburbs. So it's there that you're really seeing maybe more transformational living habits than even in New York City. And it's there where, parking is such a critical component, because as you densify these areas, which have typically been very low density, you really do require structured parking. And structured parking is very expensive. The picture that you showed up there, a beautiful facility, was actually about $80,000, $90,000 per space. So that's the reason a lot of those don't get built that way. But the real key is making these structures, first of all, making them as cost effective as they can, because it is really what is slowing, especially in these economic times, the smart growth, the TOD projects that we all kind of hunger for. You know, a traditional parking space out in the, you know, suburban areas, anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 a space. If you have to build 2 of those per residential unit or 1.5, you get a sense, $30,000, $40,000 just related to parking that's got to get built to support that. So some of the focus really needs to be is moving away from, and part of the sustainability is instead of building 2 spaces per unit or whatever the land use requires, reducing that amount. And David works very hard and has a lot of data about, you know, communities that are reducing their parking ratios. But I can tell you, if you go to a planning board meeting in these communities, it is the most, the most passionate fight that a developer will have in reducing parking ratios. So it's about really exercising smart practices related to parking, how to size it, how to share it specifically. You know, the fact that you're building, $1 million facilities and they're used half the time or half occupied is a real sin. So you have to look at different land uses, i.e., mixed use development. So those are the things that I think are transforming out in the, outside of the New York City area. We talked about a building in our prep session at a big developer built 1 million square feet at the, right here in the heart of New York City, and built 6 spaces for 1 million square feet. Now, if that was in New Jersey or, Pennsylvania or Connecticut, there would be thousands of parking spaces built to accommodate that building. And it's that type of, changing that I think is going to, move parking into more sustainable. And I think talking about design, I think you had mentioned that design is a critical issue. These facilities are going to be part of communities, part of projects for 50, 60 years, maybe longer. So it is really worth the investment to make sure that the facilities are well designed, that they have mixed uses in them. And that's hard because in a lot of these projects, parking and the structure are the first things that are kind of value engineered out. And that's why I think you have a lot of the monstrosities you see today. So hopefully that trend is changing.
Okay, so let's get to the designers here. So let's talk first to Gary Lawrence, the Chief Sustainability Officer at another monster called AECOM. And you are really working on every scale that there is, enormous scales, in fact, with AECOM. So where is the design of your major contributor to the built environment? Where does it stand in terms of this kind of integration of parking and transit and people's lives and service and all those good things that we're talking about, but it just seems to be like I'm not seeing too many examples. So what is AECOM doing?
Well, first of all, I have to say that you should think of AECOM as you think of Andre the Giant in the movie The Princess Bride.
Right.
Very big, but very nice. We're doing a lot of stuff in this space. AECOM works around the world, and so I'm not going to focus on New York. I'm going to focus on other places. And what Joachim showed in terms of that integrated multimodal hub, there are actually a number of those being designed around the world, in Asia, elsewhere. But I would note that for sustainable parking, not every parking structure can be a multimodal hub. And so we have to be thinking about the energy signature, the material sciences, all these other things associated with the majority of structured parking, which is going to be much smaller and not serving as these multimodal areas, but are going to have to provide equivalent service to the community. In Hong Kong, for example, we talked earlier about how to pay for these things. In Hong Kong, the entire link between downtown Hong Kong and the new airport was paid for by developing the air rights over parking structures that spanned the rails. And they serve as areas for multimodal transportation for the adjacent development. They induce development, creating more density around these things. But in order to service the airport, they had to come up with a revenue stream. That's one way to pay for this kind of this parking, is not thinking about them as parking structures, but thinking about them as foundations for urbanism. So what goes on top? How do you use the air rights? I think that's a very important part of this, because it also delivers customers to the transportation systems that interlink with it. At a smaller scale, we're thinking a lot about parking and the electrification. And we're also thinking in the US about what the slow take-up of electric vehicles is going to mean if the fracking discussions and the abundance of natural gas actually change the energy mix for green driving. I know the Green Parking Council, I'm on the advisory board and very proud of that role, has been thinking about electric vehicles recharging. How are we actually, if the market changes and it's natural gas powered vehicles, which can, in some areas, be more green because most of the energy in some districts is produced by burning coal, how are we actually going to accommodate that? We're also thinking a lot in China about the increase in the number of vehicles. I saw something the other day that 10 years ago there were about 15 million vehicles in China, and today there are over 70 million vehicles in China, and it's going at an exponential rate. They're actually destroying a lot of their cultural heritage to find places to park their vehicles in the urban centers in China. So we're working in a lot of places in China on structured parking, both below ground and above ground, in order to help preserve that history, and again, help them align their other modes of transit so that they can interconnect with these vehicles. But in China, they seem to be abandoning a lot of opportunities that will eventually come back. But one last thing I'll say is that one of the things that I think about a lot with regard to sustainability is the issue of designing for adaptation, because the future is random and uncertain. It's not determined. So as we're thinking about green parking, part of the greenness has to do with the lowest cost evolution of this space. I worked on a project in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany where the city actually got the developer to build 12-foot ceilings rather than 8-foot ceilings in the parking structure, on the assumption that development would be occurring around there and people would be using more transit. So it provided a structure that didn't have to be torn down, that it could be infilled with commercial or residential space as the need for structured parking was reduced. So there's a variety of ways we can take this question on, and we're involved in a number of them.
So just to follow up on one thing, which has been kind of the really scary thing that I've been watching in these communities where fracking is going on and where this really awful things are happening to their water supply. And there's no national discussion on any of this. I mean, I think we don't seem to have the stomach for discussing this, except for ExxonMobil telling us in their commercials that this is the best technology that they ever invented. So what's your answer to that?
Well, I think the evidence base for the safety of fracking is very, very weak.
Okay.
But until we have the evidence, I'm afraid it's one of these things where something pretty dramatically bad is going to happen in order to change the conversation. Because the idea that the U.S.'s economy can actually grow and thrive for the next 100 years with a resource we control within our own boundaries, and reducing the need to depend upon foreign supplies of energy. I think that's so compelling that people aren't willing to stop and think, and it's like a number of things, that something dramatic is going to have to happen.
Well, it also has such an ugly name. How can you be friendly with fracking? Okay, so Gisela Bowerman, this idea of change being needed to knit together architecture, urbanism, parking into a sustainable cloth for the cities. Your firm envisions things in a very sort of compelling and beautiful way. What are your thoughts on this kind of knitting together and architecture being at the center of it?
Well, first of all, I want to say we are very excited that the agenda of the Green Parking Council is to broaden the idea of what green development really is, and not only think about there are always different scales, and architects always think in a variety of scales. One is obviously providing a certain material property to parking garages. The other one is programming, and that's when architecture comes in the sense that we as architects provide a certain idea for geometry and for the sequencing of spaces. And another scale is the urban scale, and there is where the most broad possibilities for change is, because we see that the cityscape changes and it becomes a very different experience, which is something that you generate as you go along. It's not something that is fixed, but it's flexible and adaptive, and it has to do with the way that you interact with it, or it performs in a way that you interact with it, and that for us is very exciting as architects to see evolve. What we also want to focus on is the idea of architecture as a collaborative effort. So it's a profession that brings together many different expertises, and thereby it's possible to generate a flexible model of collaboration.
Okay, so why don't we go from the urban moment to the region? Because I think without understanding what our region is about and how it interconnects, we really don't have a full picture. So we can be building these wonderful green garages in the city, but if New Jersey keeps driving in and the whole state descends on us, and I can talk about this because I'm from New Jersey, so I'm talking about my own life here. So, but really, what is it that the region needs to do in order for the whole region to understand the necessity for this green parking hub, this sort of ability to create multimodal transit that works for the existing and the future city and the region? And that question, of course, is for Dave.
Well, I mean, we certainly see a range of activities becoming increasingly concentrated in Manhattan. I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday morning, a real estate investor, who basically, we were talking about smaller cities across the country and what it will take to turn them around, and we're about the fact that things are becoming increasingly concentrated in the larger cities in the country, and he basically said it's getting to the point where even locating in Chicago has a cost associated with it. Everything needs to be closer and closer, both temporally and spatially, to Manhattan, which is a scary thing in its own right and probably has a lot of negative externalities associated with it. But one of the implications of that are that as intensity of uses becomes increasingly concentrated in the city, the means of accessing the urban core become limited. You can only really access the urban core, and over time this will become increasingly so, by transit, by walking, by alternative modes, by shared, socialized modes, which means that those mobility hubs or the transit stops or the bus hubs, et cetera, in the suburban communities, and I live in the suburban communities as well, I live in Connecticut, become the points of entry to the urban core, because any other point of personal entry to the urban core has been displaced by other higher value uses, which means that in the suburban centers and the suburban towns, you have a hub, I mean, in its most simplest form, a commuter rail station, right? and how do you access that commuter rail station becomes paramount. And the majority of the work that I do is working with municipalities around the region, trying to figure out how to better capitalize on their transit access to New York City, how to better capitalize on their transit hub, on their commuter rail station, on their farther flung subway station. And you have at that nexus the competition between people living 2 to 5 miles from the nearest station looking to access that by car, the people living 1 to 2 miles looking to access that place by bus or by transit shuttle, commuter shuttle, the people living a half a mile looking to access that hub by walking, and all of that compounding on one another in a very, very tight space, an eighth of a mile to a quarter mile of the station. And so this is when this issue becomes one of that's actually in the dialogue. I happen to live in Stamford, where we have an aging parking deck right next to the train station, built in the 1980s. Right now, 60%, believe it or not, 60% of the people that use the Stamford Transportation Center are coming to Stamford rather than leaving from it, either reverse commuting from the city or commuting from other Connecticut centers. And of the 40% that are leaving from Stamford, the majority, more than 50%, do not access it by a single occupancy vehicle. But we still have close to 2,000 or just over 2,000 spaces right next to the station, 800 of which need to be rebuilt. So we're having this discussion about how do you rebuild those 800 spaces? Do you rebuild them in a way, as you said, that they become the foundation for a commercial development? Do you rebuild them as close as humanly possible to the station so people driving from 2 to 5 miles away have the closest walk between their car and the train because they're now anticipating a 40-minute ride to their ultimate destination? Do you displace it so that you free up that land for something higher value and do a satellite lot with a commuter shuttle? And so it's in situations like that in the suburban centers where you have these compounding needs based on the fact that access to the core of the region is becoming increasingly limited in the modes that you can use. And those are the instances, I mean, this is a perfect case study around this 800-car garage where it becomes part of the public consciousness and part of the public dialogue in communities around the region.
Just going to say that in a previous life, I was involved in a study of the location of parking structures in relationship to transit facilities. And there was one theory that I actually enjoyed, that is you should put them at about a block away and then have convenience retail on that block so people getting off the train can meet their daily needs walking to their car so they don't have a bunch of linked trips stopping off a bunch of other places when they're going home. Because particularly with internal combustion engines, it's the cold start that produces the most of the greenhouse gases, and once they're warmed up, you might as well keep driving for all the damage they do.
I just wanted to add as well, I think you mentioned the access to the region's core and what needed to be done. I mean, that's a great example. There was going to be, we have one rail tunnel that comes in from New Jersey. Actually, it serves the whole northeast corridor, DC to Boston. So if that tunnel has a problem, there's no access to the city. And there was a project to build another tunnel, and it got scuttled because of cost. But that project would have made dozens of communities in New Jersey more accessible by rail, shorter commutes, better places to live, and as a result, that's not taking place. Part of the infrastructure, too, that's required is parking for exactly the same reasons, not only for the people that live there, but for the commuters who live outside of walking distance to get to the train station. So I think what needs to be done is obviously investing in infrastructure, but also investing in parking infrastructure that can support both rail access and TOD. And I think that would be a much better investment than the, I don't know, countless millions, if not billions, as you head down the turnpike and see the expansion they're doing. It's a phenomenal thing. If you haven't been down the New Jersey Turnpike, see the expansion that's going on and the amount of money that went into that, and this rail, the rail access got scuttled because of costs as well. So
I'd just like to add to that a little bit. On the other side of Manhattan, this whole notion of Long Island, and this is not pick on Long Island Day for for ULI, but this does relate directly to some of the conversations that we've been having about connectivity, right? I mean, instead of investing in widening lanes, which is a flawed premise from start to finish, and it's that money pit that you can never get away from. Jersey Turnpike is. No, but in all fairness, it's not just making room for more cars. It's right, and that's ultimately what it ends up feeding. The Beltway had the same idea first around Baltimore and then around Washington, and there's many other examples around the country. But the idea, instead of just investing in the feeding mechanisms to endpoints, is to invest in some of the community connectivity, right? So a parking lot and this parking structure, however green, however intelligent it might be, if at the end of the day it serves the purpose of being able to connect commuters, connect communities, connect people who can get to a different node in the in the urban fabric, right? That has a residual value. I mean, that has it has a specific value not only for the localized real estate, and there are studies, and David is alluding to this, and I know portions of ACOM have done studies about how far away from a transit node, and at first the perception of them being decreased property values, because after all, they're close to a bus station. As it turns out, the closer you are, the more valuable your real estate is, for all of the reasons that we've been talking about. And I think a lot of this goes to the motivations, and you had asked before about, from a real estate development perspective, sustainability. And I know we mapped out as one of our objectives for today, defining what sustainability, could mean in the context of the Green Parking Council. Within ULI, certainly within the context of ULI in New York, we talk about sustainability in that double entendre of both ecologic as well as economic sustainability, because one without the other is a fruitless exercise. And when we get around to how you make this all make economic sense, that's what helps drive the viability of an $80,000 per spot, as opposed to an Amtrak mandated, if you don't build the requisite number of $24,000 per spot locations, you can't have an Acela stop, right? I mean, it's a different kind of a model, and that's where this whole idea of being able to really transform how you look at a parking spot, not as an endpoint, but as a connecting point, and how you look at the transit as part of that, and how you get in your luxury vehicle. I thought it was interesting that in the slides you provided before, nowhere in there did you talk about BMW's luxury appointments, or the things that have distinguished BMW over the course of the last several decades, which I thought was interesting.
I believe it's also within parking or this mobility thing, we can make a difference. We talked about design and appearance and architectural shape and so on. But you said something, a parking should serve as. And if I tell the audience that the development of a car is about $1 billion or 1 billion euro to develop a car, you will believe that the marketing of the car during the lifetime is the same amount of money. So if you compare that to parking, so if you spend $40,000 or $30,000 for a parking lot, how much is the effort you spend for marketing? It's zero. It's zero. And what I believe is that to make a business out of that is to inform people that parking is not only there and by accident you can find it, then really to reach out to people and tell them how they can use it, what's the advantages to get there, and to help people get from there to the other one. And if you say the study says that there is a walking distance which is convenient for people, why not telling that people? Car business today is marketing. No car manufacturer would sell any car without marketing. And I believe parking, sustainable parking, incorporated in really mobility has something to do with marketing, with information, connecting people to this and telling them what it's all about.
Okay, so I've been asked to open it up to the audience. Any questions and comments in the audience? And maybe you should come up to a mic because we're being recorded. Anyone? Okay, come up here so that we can actually hear you and get you on film.
I guess I'll stand.
Just stay and
Hi, everybody. Thank you all, and I don't want to stand in front of anyone, so I guess I'll try to move to the side. My name is Sarah Salpeter. I'm with Streetline, and I'm excited to be here. This is my first opportunity to attend a Green Parking Council event, and what I'd like to ask the group is what kind of discussions are happening around, and was just talked about, so you motivated me or inspired me to come up here. What kind of discussions are happening around providing information to the motorist today? This is what I'm doing, and along with Streetline, 24/7 is providing that information about parking. And this morning is a great example. I live in South Florida, and I was at the Fort Lauderdale airport driving around for 15 minutes looking for a parking spot. So think about all the gas that I used, think about all the stress that I had trying to get a spot because my flight was leaving in an hour. Think about all of the green gas, all those carbon emissions that I was spewing into the garage that I was driving around, and the people that were walking with their luggage by the car that I was circling around looking for parking. Think about all the money that I spent on gas today in addition to paying for my parking.
So how do you tell that story to your constituency? Because that's a story that is really very dramatic. And how do you communicate that? Because a driver doesn't really think about those things, because why should they? Yes, there's a hand back there.
I'm sorry? Oh. Okay. So to answer your question, how are we
Yeah,
communicating that
Right.
at Streetline?
yeah.
So what we're doing is we're deploying sensor technology in the streets. And we are, and I cover the East Coast, so all the conversation that's going on here is what I think about morning and night. For example, in DC, I was at the House of Representatives last month, and this is a government conversation going on. There's congressmen who are concerned, and the government's concerned about everything that we're talking about. In the Kiss and Ride facilities in DC, they are now providing they're investing in the technology so they can provide their riders information on where to find parking at their Kiss and Ride facilities in the DC area, and they're going to expand that outside into Virginia and Maryland as well.
Okay, so we have some AECOM wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
First, I want to talk about where the evolution seems to be going. I'm sure BMW is working with Siemens and others. A lot of automobile manufacturers are working with Microsoft about sensor technology so that as you enter an area, your car will know where there's an open parking spot, and through your car you can reserve the space and pay for it. So the driving around and pops on your map where the parking is, and you can just go there and do it. That's maybe 10 years out, and the cost of 2 years out, 2 years out, 2 years out. But in terms of how to communicate this, I would suggest that everybody knows your story, because everybody's lived it who lives in an urban area. And it's a matter of communicating that there's something you can do about it. It's not sharing your pain and that sort of stuff. It's a suggestion that, okay, you need to be much more strategic. You need to decide when it is that you actually want to bring your vehicle into the city and live with that frustration versus using an alternative mode if one exists. because that's the real question. I used to be the planning director of Seattle, and my mayor was at a meeting once around a big shopping center in the city, and somebody said, you know, it's almost impossible to get here at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and was complaining about it. And he said, I know, only an idiot would try. We have to learn from, it was his last term, we have to figure out how to communicate to people that it's their choice about whether to experience that or not. When there are real alternatives. When there aren't any real alternatives, then it's going to be a different conversation.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that because just yesterday there was a piece in the news in the New York Times that the New York City Council approved a package of zoning changes that will make it easier for, I'm quoting, property owners to undertake energy efficiency upgrades and even produce their own solar and wind power. And what we are thinking is that in policy making there's now great limitations in terms of possible retrofittings or additions in order to make an existing facility green. But then there seems to be a strong backing to keep the property and real estate boundaries flexible from now on in order to achieve technical enhancements of building structures. And with these new zoning changes, it seems that this can also be applied to parking, and one can apply those new zoning regulations to parking. But what we also think is that on a policy level, that parking providers needs to get concessions and incentives to allow and attract public programming into their facilities. And there seems to be not yet the right situation to do that. But we think that it's also on that this mixed programming also has to happen on as an incentive for parking facilities.
So new zoning really presents new design opportunities, and usually they're interpreted as one more awful law to deal with, but there seems to be a lot more opportunities in the new zoning law for New York City. So can we, the two architects on the panel, starting with you, can we start imagining with this new zoning, with wind powers, with solar power, with the idea of tighter development, what could actually happen to a New York City parking garage? How will it look? Let's just say, okay, so BMW has a sensor technology that's due in 2 years. Let's just say 2 years. 2 years from now, when those BMW cars are here, those urban cars are here, and they are made for car sharing. So what garage and what area could be improved upon with all of these bells and whistles that you all have been talking about? And how can that happen? Should we, there you go. Let's start with you, and then Gisela.
So well, a lot of it's already happened. I mean, the parking garages will have solar arrays. I mean, to some, obviously they already do, satisfying almost 100% of the electrical requirements of operating garages because they are much more expensive to operate than surface lots. So solar arrays, charging stations. I think you're going to see, as you indicated, a much more focus on adornment as far as painting. They're not going to look maybe as gray as they do. Color, paint, very attractive vestibules, because again, in parking there's a saying, it's the first and last impression of everything that you do. If you go to a downtown and go to a restaurant and come back and you're in a dark, dingy garage that you feel unsafe in, it's not a good experience. So it's planners and parking planners and architects are more and more focused about making that facility as green as possible, with recycled materials, with solar arrays, with charging stations, with preferred parking for van pools and fuel-efficient vehicles. But it's also, again, designing the facility so that it's got mixed uses, that it's creating a lot of activity, that it's shared, that it's got multiple uses so that 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day, it's active, it's vibrant, it's secure. Obviously, parking decks are perceived as dangerous, unsafe places. So it's the lighting, it's all these types of things that focus on making it a better experience of the public realm that's been in the past. So, and I think there's a lot of great examples of that already, but I'm sure there'll be a continued focus.
So are we talking about designing the green parking garage for people instead of just cars? Because I think that's one of the issues that we have, is things get designed for you know, the urban street is designed to move vehicles. Well, now we know that people also have to be moving. And so how, and now New York City is reclaiming its streets for the bikers, the pedestrians, the human beings who actually make the city work. So is the parking garage part of that thinking, that there's humanity at the end of all of this, and it's not just, you know, putting your car somewhere? Can somebody, yes,
Yeah.
Giselle?
Yeah, actually, that's what we are thinking, that is necessary, and that's what I was talking about, the incentives on a political scale too, that to put new programming and different programming, and thereby bring more people into parking garages, also makes them more safe. Because the moment that there's a lot of traffic, there will be a lot of, you know, you don't need to put a security camera if there's a lot of traffic in a certain area. So the idea of programming that you know, whatever is happening on parking lots or in parking garages already now, which are clubs and playgrounds and street sports and all these kind of impromptu things, can become something that is more organized and more become part of a parking garage, instead of this monofunctional thing that, you know, just is a dead body sitting there. And in a similar way, with a smart with the idea of smart cars and new technologies, it's possible to also have a time overlap, that you don't need to have a parking space 24 hours a day, but maybe it's for, I don't know, 10 hours, and 2 hours is a club space, and 2 hours is something else. Or, so you have a timeshare that's going on, and that helps the parking to become interwoven with the urban fabric, and through that activity that is going on in the parking lot, you generate more traffic, you generate more incentives to put money there. It's interesting to invest in these spaces. I think it's a multiplier. So we would, you know, architects are fans of programming, and we are trained to put programs together and to observe situations and think of activities and how you organize them. And I think that a parking garage is a fantastic object to focus in that sense.
So we bring Bon Jovi in and do a lot of dancing and singing in one of these garages after hours? Yes.
This, I'm not an architect. I want to, in Seattle Seattle is actually overparked. There's more parking spaces than are needed, given the zoning code and those sorts of things. And even though the merchants believe that there's not nearly enough parking. And the reason that's true is people coming from outside, particularly women driving alone, don't like to go to the bottom of parking garages. You know, you give incentives to in the leases, so the companies leasing the building get the top, and so people coming in to shop get the bottom. This was particularly problematic during the Christmas season when the merchants, you know, really needed to increase their sales. We provided a very simple solution. And that is, we worked with some youth organizations to train kids to be parking garage concierge. So people would come in and they'd help them carry their packages down and provide security in the walk to the car. And so all of a sudden, this was a social space rather than a space to fear. So it's not just design, it's operations. It's how you animate the space. It's how you create culture, because sustainability in the long run is about optimizing conditions for human development. It's not about being green. Being more green is part of optimizing conditions for human development. So if we think of these structures as places that have to become more social, reduce fear and anxiety associated with their use, then the resources available to improve their quality, those sorts of things will increase.
So I love that idea of optimizing conditions for human development, because that's what all the built environment should be about, everything that we do. There's some architects in the audience here who would like to comment on that possibility of optimizing conditions for human development. Any architects? You're on the spot because you're the ones who are creating these places, and you like to program, but where are the humans in your program? So can we hear something from some of you architects? Or Gisela?
Do you want to say something, sir?
I'm not an architect, but I have a question.
Yeah. Okay, ask a question.
Hi, I'm Michael Kodransky from the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. And this question of having an operations plan for a parking facility, and parking facilities not just as social spaces, but also as functions of the transport network. And when we think about transit, there's always an operations plan. But when we think about parking, it doesn't seem like there is one so much for the social moments and for the moments when you need to park the car. And an extension of that, so if you're starting from scratch with a blank slate, and you have all of these ideas of what you're going to use that space for, how do you model what amount of parking is enough? Is there a threshold in density that you pass after which point no amount of parking makes sense? Is there a maximum of access points of other modes, transit, walking, biking? So.
It's a very good question. Would Urban Land like to start with this?
So I think it raises a great point, and I'd like to shift it a little bit. And we were just commenting before on the, on the idea of whether or not a parking garage, a parking facility, is designed for cars or the inhabitants of those cars. In the same way that once a building, all glass, all steel, lock everybody in, they'll come in and out during the course of the day only, at their prescribed time, has changed dramatically. Right? And the same time that we've been talking about, Earth Day, we've also watched in that same 40 plus years now a transformation in the way that buildings are designed, the way that buildings respond to the streetscape, the way they're part of the streetscape, as opposed to isolating them from it. In the same way that, it's great that we have the view that we have from here, because it's exemplar of the reclamation of waterfront, which oddly Manhattan spent decades isolating itself from its own waterfront. Well, now, we hear about the sixth borough. It's always so hard to say, but, the idea of the waterfront is integral to what, what planners cherish and look for ways to be able to maximize value associated with parcels of land, many of which have for some time been parking, surface parking structures. It's the sort of the easiest last way to be able to identify a use that maybe in the long run wasn't responsible for, but for its time, had a placeholder. Well, while we were thinking about that, a train station isn't really designed for trains. Let's be clear that that's not its purpose, right? Neither should we be thinking that a parking structure is necessarily only for its mechanical four-wheeled or two-wheeled inhabitants. Right? It's for the people who are driving those, right? So if you imagine, and this is, back to the sense of shifting how one goes about designing it, how it fits into the neighborhood, and Michael, I hope this gets to your question, because I know if you drive a car to a node, you park it, and then you get on a BRT kind of a solution so that you can get yourself around the urban core, that's probably a little clunkier than it needs to be. But further out, the reach from the suburban nodes, right? Those micro nodes that feed that whole network, that whole transportation network, you have a different kind of a responsiveness. And it's very local and it's going to be community based, right? You know, we look at the city of New York as a single example of density. You know, density is no longer a bad thing. It's what feeds a parking structure's economic viability, because you're able to gather a lot of users, both mechanical and, you know, and two-legged, and work them into the community that they're passing through. And, you know, and again, David, this is probably more for you to comment on relative to the transit-oriented development component, but that's all about fostering regional collaboration. So not only is there a design collaborative component to this, you know, but the whole economic development, you know, is really, again, about fostering regional collaboration and how all of these things are interrelated. And that's a big part of this. And I think a lot of that, for it to work, is shifting the perspective of what, in this case, a parking structure is for.
So just to ask BMW about this for 1 second. So when those two new cars come out in 2013, the carbon fiber cars, urban cars, and they are, and you have hopes of it being a car share program. So how does that begin to shift the function of the existing parking garage? Because then you have, will the cars be coming there, or will they be all over the city, or what is your overall plan in how to accommodate these amazing cars around the city?
Now these cars come, the electrical cars come with network functionality. It shows where you can park, it shows where you can charge. Charging is a fear for many of the electric car drivers. We have some experience with Minis and other cars in the field for years, and we know that in the very beginning the fear is where to charge. And so the cars are coming with some intelligent network solutions showing people where charging stations are. And we believe that a lot of these charging stations will be in parking garages. So the cars will find their way to the parking garages. On the other way, if you say car sharing, our concept of car sharing as we have it in Munich in Germany is that the cars are spotted around the city. So you see a car, you spontaneously can take it and drive away and give it to another one who is using it then. If you want to do that in Manhattan, you will have problems having cars on the road. So you have to the need for having cars in parking garages, but you can't see it. So to see these cars, you need a smartphone or some intelligent application to say, now we have the next car, and it should be in walking distance. Though the network, as I said in my presentation, the network of parking garages is essential for this kind of electric cars growth in the market. And as I said before, the question if the cars of the future will be electrical or other sources, it's not discussed to an end. But we believe, as we did invest in different technology, that the electrical car will be one of the dominating cars in the future for sure, for it has really substantial benefit for cities from a pollution and sustainability standpoint. So these kind of cars will be designed from the very beginning as let's say social cars, not only be shared in professional car sharing communities but also privately. So if I buy one of these cars, which will be quite expensive in the very beginning because it's electrical cars, it's carbon and so on, it's new, I will be able to reduce my cost of ownership, which is also for parking relevant, for the car comes with a sharing equipment. So I could share the car with my panel colleagues here, and we could build a mini community, and if everybody has a parking, we could also share our parkings. So this kind of information comes with the car, so the car enables this kind of technology, and this will enforce parking garages to step into these kind of programs to make themselves part of the program. So we will see networks of this kind of mobility hubs.
So, I mean, is that sharing a fantasy in the United States where people are so protective of their individual vehicles and where road rage rules outside of New York City. So can we talk about that?
Well, car sharing is, it's really growing exponentially, and it's college campuses, it's taking off, and I've been involved in projects where, and it goes back to right-sizing parking structures for smart growth and TOD projects. Car sharing is one of the tools in this, best practice toolbox to say, my wife and I live at this development, we have train access, but I work, or on the weekends I have to go somewhere. So we may not need a car, or we certainly may not need that second car because there is a car sharing capability there. Projects have been able to get reduced parking ratios. So instead of building 400 spaces, they only need to build 300 spaces. And that's a huge savings to the economic viability of the project. Hoboken, right across the way, has done a citywide car sharing program, I'm sure, like other municipalities where they have 100 shared cars throughout the city. If residents turn in their parking pass and they get free car sharing services. So it's a great tool, card sharing, and I certainly do believe that that the utilization is on its way and will continue to grow, and it's going to be very, very, very viable.
I'd like to add to that. I can say from experience that the Germans are quite proprietary about their cars, so car sharing wouldn't work better in Germany than here, I think. But it works, I think, in both worlds. So what I wanted to say is what I think why car sharing will work even better in the future is because there's the possibility to personalize your car, right? You take it over, and the moment you take it over, you already tell it to become this temperature and to play this music or this radio station, and so on and so on. And I think that's something that ideally, or in the further future, we can expand into the urban environment, because that's also the way that we will experience the cityscape in the future. Because with smart materials and with the way that we can interact in the city with other people, or with buildings, or with our transportation needs, or with our needs for finding a certain location, will also define really the scape that we experience as human beings in the city. And that's where it gets, where the boundaries start to really be pushed away, and where the boundary for expanding the urban space and for expanding, for the interaction, or the interference between the car or the vehicle and the individual and the urban space starts to be very strongly meshed together. Speaking of meshing.
I think with urbanization, car sharing is inevitable. Whether it's going to take off in the suburbs or not, who knows? But I live in Battery Park City, and it would cost me twice as much for monthly parking as it would for car payments for a car. And so the pure economics of the change in urbanization, I think, again, there's no choice but to make this shift for most income earners.
Okay, so I think we'll do the last sequence here, and let's start talk about moving forward and what's possible for now and in the future. So we'll go down the line, and let's talk about the low-hanging fruit, something that we can do now in this transition that we seem to be in, we may be doing now, but they could be better. So who would like to start? Maybe Joachim, since he's coming from a very advanced culture. Maybe he could. 9 hours ahead. Yes.
So the question was, what the practical advice?
What is practical now to do about the issues that we just talked about? What is being done or can be done now or in the next 6 months to a year?
So, on one hand, for sure, we at BMW, we're pushing our programs towards parking garages, as we were discussing. But what I really want people to do or initiate, in my eyes, would be a kind of innovation cell innovation approach on how to make business with parking garages in all that urban circumstances and targets we were discussing, really to challenge this thing and to really make it happen, to come out with some ideas how and practical spaces how to make it. So kind of innovation cell to say, now let's take a certain urban area, problem area, and take some experts together and make a real innovative approach to find solutions.
So anybody here from a really great business school connection? Because this would be a really good case study for a local business school to kind of create some dialogue around it. Okay, next, Urban Land. Let's hear.
I'm not sure that this fits into the mission of the Urban Land Institute, but I think the answer to your question is there's an app for that, right? I mean, when it comes right down to it, you know, the near-term innovation, the very low-hanging fruit, and your frustration at the Fort Lauderdale airport, you should be able to have you can't dial on it, hands-free phone. You know, so your smartphone should tell you not where there are parking garages, but should tell you where there's a spot for you. It should, yeah, then that's, and so, yeah, so that's the kind of thing and that's that much more important on that fringe as you're transitioning from, I'm very comfortable in my isolated world of my privately owned vehicle, and I'm gonna go immerse myself in the dense urban fabric. You know, that transition is what de-stresses someone who's heading to an airport to fly to a different urban center. There's an app for that. That's the low-hanging fruit.
Good. Tim? Jim Zullo?
Yeah, I would have to agree on the technology side. It's, you know, it's there. Parking is, you know, I've been involved since the early 90s, and the technology has really expanded, you know, the street line stuff, the apps, but, you know, just on you drive down a parkway and you don't have to go through a toll booth. It's the same thing in parking. In time, you'll have, you know, no needs for gates because everything will be license plate recognition, charge your credit card. You'll reduce all the queuing, you know, at the entrance and exits, thereby reducing, you know, carbon emissions. I also think that, you know, and you know, whether I don't know that this can get done in the next 6 months or a year, but I think the overall thoughts about, you know, the need for a car or the need for as many as we've planned in the past. I think it's land use. I think obviously there's been great strides over the last 10 years about reducing parking requirements, getting more realistic, not relying on just ITE, which is a very random sampling of malls, of doctor's offices and things like that, but really focusing on the particular community, focusing on the availability of mass transit, focusing on the demographics to help guide, you know, parking requirements and needs, and understanding that the recession has had a huge impact. You know, car ownership is at $10,000, $12,000 a year. People are much more focused on putting that money towards, you know, their mortgage, their rent, their savings, that type of thing. So I think, you know, those are certainly trends on the near horizon.
Okay, so for the region, Dave?
Yeah, so I mean, at the regional scale, I'd say, you know, the parking issue we deal with most, as I've kind of described, is access to the commuter rail network. And I think right now we're kind of stuck in a rut of just trying to squeeze as much parking in every station area as possible, regardless of whether or not there's higher or better uses, when there's a handful of stations that are best suited to act as you know, conduits from the suburban landscape into the commuter rail network. And I'd say lowest hanging fruit is broadcasting that information on the highways and the parkways of the region, so that, you know, when you're passing by the exit with, you know, 150 available spaces at a commuter rail station with a train stopping in 10 minutes, that's going to get you to your destination in Manhattan quicker than if you continue to sit on the highway. We'll begin to focus parking in those most appropriate places around the regional rail network, freeing up land for higher and better uses at other locations.
Okay, Gisela, from the architect's point of view, low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I think, you know, this zoning package that was just passed is for us is a great way to follow, and I think that could be the possibility to implement green features into existing structures and into new structures, of course. But I think that should be, in our minds, should be applied to parking garages, and that you really follow through with these applications. And the other thing is to maybe, even if not so many people are parking or driving at this moment, maybe the possibility to test if you cross program, if you put another program into your parking garage or next to it or close to it or on top of it, what happens to it and how does the space change? Maybe that could be a test drive in the next year.
Yes, from the big
Friendly.
friendly green giant that is building the world, yes.
I'm going to, first of all, something that's happened that no one would ever have thought was low-hanging fruit has occurred. And that is the parking industry that is typically at one another's throats, trying to destroy their competitors, has joined together and said, you know, we need to do something about parking if we're going to be relevant for urbanization in the future. And that's amazing. The next step is not low-hanging, but critically important, and that is to use this power that has come together with all these suppliers to work with the business improvement districts and the chambers of commerce in the cities to put pressure on all of the organizations that provide public transportation, who typically don't talk to one another at all, to bring them together around the idea that parking is an interface where all of their systems have to come together and they have to coordinate to do that. Now that's a very difficult proposition, but through the power of working together, I think it's possible, and that will be a necessary precondition, I think, for making any of this to happen.
Great, so, very good, very good. So now this is a question of choice among you. Those of you who want to project out to the next 10 years, because technology is changing so fast, we can't project longer than 10 years anymore. I mean, we can probably project the future is 5 years from now. So let's take the long view. Who would like to volunteer a long view plan for us to consider?
Well, I mean, I'll say I won't attempt to describe it too much in words, but we have a national infrastructure investment program at Regional Plan Association called America 2050, and I would encourage folks to go to America 2050. There's a lot of great stuff on there, but specifically there's a movie called Journey to Detroit that follows an individual leaving his house in suburban Michigan and going to a ball game in downtown Detroit, and the video is manipulated so that all of the EV, transit, high-speed rail, granny flats, urban agriculture, et cetera, is all integrated into the existing environment, and I think it gives a phenomenal kind of, point of, personal perspective view on what it could be like in a given trip 20, 30 years from now.
I like manipulated films. Okay. So any other long range?
I just think that the long-range planning related to parking in so many different environments, be it urban, be it campus, are going to focus on how to use the park. And it's happening, and there's good people that are doing it. How to use the activity that we've talked about, how to use the facility and the thousands of people that come and go to help, enliven its surrounding area. And that's really should be, I don't think, unless it's physically incapable, that a parking structure will be built or should be built in the future without some other use incorporated into it, be it street level retail or an overbuild or a park or adjacency. So, that's a trend that has already begun. I think it'll continue to gain momentum.
So. The fastest growing demographic in the U.S. are people 65 years of age and older. I think one of the long-term trends is that these these nodes, these parking structures, are going to be the key points for mobility and access for people who don't drive. So their whole reason for being is going to change from places to store automobiles to the center of community mobility and access.
Very good. So those are really great ideas. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to our convener, who is going to sum up what he heard. Do a good job.
Thank you. I took copious notes. I was going to chart this, but there was just way too much. I'm really excited that we got somebody to videotape today. So thank you very much, Keith. We look forward to seeing your work. And I want to thank Gretchen and Trevor and Heidi, who helped pull this together, Tara from here, and a bunch of other folks. This was, we came up with this idea, what was it, Rachel? 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks? This has been an amazing experience for all of us. And I think you all out there are experts in your own right. You were bashful, you didn't want to be recorded, but we'll talk to you afterwards, and we're all going to stick around. There's plenty of wine and food. This is an incredibly important discussion. Gary sort of pointed something out at the end. We've talked a lot about the importance of technology, and you can taste the potential for providing us with more information, but how we use that information and how we connect with each other and how we build stronger communities is the potential there. We are exposed to so much information every day. You can Google anything, and it's what we do with it. And the potential here is to build something really beautiful and to figure out what the future of our communities is going to be like. And what's been especially exciting to me as the executive director of the Green Parking Council is people's willingness to have these discussions and think about how we can do things better. From people in the parking industry who really are cutthroat competitors with one another, but because of the relationships people have built through the years and because of the vision, particularly emanating from John Schmid, the chair of the board of the Green Parking Council, there's a real hopefulness about doing this better and building garages more beautifully and making them spaces for places that are not just sort of cars sitting there, but places for people to move from location to location and to live our lives. So I think all of us who worked on organizing this are really excited that this was as wonderful a conversation as it was. We're going to continue this in San Francisco on June 27th. We're hoping to have this kind of conversation at the Urban Land Institute in Denver in October, I think it is. And we hope to continue it online, so hopefully everybody gave us your email addresses as you signed in. If you didn't, you can sign in on the way out. And reach out to all of you, because it's a really important conversation for all of us to have. And there's great energy about helping to build a more sustainable future that optimizes human development. That's our goal here. And this really feels like quite a moment, and there's just incredible energy. And we thank you all for coming tonight. Susan, you did an amazing job as mom, moderator, challenger. The panel did a wonderful job. Thank you all. You came together incredibly quickly. And thank you all for coming, and please drink some wine, eat some cheese, some grapes, and talk, continue to talk. Thank you.